Okay, so welcome, guys. I'm glad you came out. You guys are my people that come to things like this and just to learn and get other perspectives, opinions, meet new people, network. I didn't meet you yet. Okay. So welcome and thank you for coming, especially if you came from Utah County, because I heard it was.
Fun.
Yeah. So if you weathered that, that's great. And hopefully you get some value today. So I'm going to kind of tell you what the agenda is going to be. So we're going to start with our sponsors. Ashley's going to introduce Janine and Maddie. Thank you for this space. What a great conference room, huh? We want to come back here. This is a great room. So thank you for that, and thank you for sponsoring. We're going to have lunch afterwards. But what we're going to do after those introductions with our sponsors is I'll kind of start us off, and most of you filled out a question or a comment or something you hope is a takeaway from today that you're interested in hearing about. So I've got those printed out, and there's a lot of duplicates in this and that. So we're going to go through some of those first. I'll kind of moderate, right? And we'll have a discussion about those that are popular and common. So if that sparks a new question for you, hold it. Because when we get towards the end, as we get through some of these common questions, then we'll do an open Q&A with you guys. You can ask questions and we can go deeper on something or get a different opinion from somebody you didn't hear from. Does that sound good? Okay, all right, so you're.
Yeah. Just want to thank everyone again for coming out. We're super excited to have all of you, and we do actually do trainings every week at our office. But we've decided to, venture out a little bit and go to a new location, and I think it's super fun having new people come in, because we're all about, we want to create a better agent experience.
This is Ashley, by the way. For those of you who don't know, and I'm not, the ones I'm just meeting, I'm Jeff Marchant, sorry. Speaking of introductions, and yeah, this is actually my oldest daughter, actually. I got my whole family here. Sydney is right here. Where's Chase? Chase is right there. And Lynn, the boss, is in the back.
Anyway, I just wanted to introduce our sponsors. I'm super happy to have Janine and Maddie. I just met Maddie briefly, but I've known Janine for a while, and I can tell you just from knowing Janine and talking with Maddie that they just super care about people and are just really genuine. And so I just want to introduce them, Janine Ottley and Maddie Swensen. They'll come up. Thanks.
Yay! Yay! So fun.
Hey, there's a little people on Zoom. Come on.
Okay. Hi, everybody in virtual world. Thank you all so much for being here. I think there is like an energy and a power about meeting together. So I love having you here. Thanks for braving the weather and coming out. Like Jeff said, I'm Janine Ottley. I work with Edge Homes. I have been in new construction just over 8 years as an agent, and I've been here about 2.5. And right now we're excited to learn and talk about the market and current conditions. And I'm not really here to promote my thing. I just want to learn and talk with everybody and enjoy our time here. But I'm here for anything that you need, and my business cards are in the back, and that's it. Maddie?
Yes, so I'm with First Colony Mortgage. We're the preferred lender for Edge. So that's how I know Janine. I'm kind of similar to her. I've been in the industry for 7 years, and I've been on the lending team for Edge for about 2. What we do with them can be annoying sometimes. I know for those of you who don't have relationships with people at First Colony, which is a pre-approval, and having, kind of being forced to work with us at least a little bit, to help your clients. And obviously, obviously we've got some awesome lenders here too that you guys might know better than me. So kind of our goal for you is to feel like you have a trustworthy person at First Colony for it, in the instance that you do work with Edge, and that even if you do want to continue using your lender, that we make our part as easy for you as possible. So we're always looking for ways to make the pre-approval quick and smooth. We know people get comfortable with their lenders, and we want to keep the process smooth and not make things harder for you. So anything we can ever do to help you with that, we are all game for, because we know everybody has relationships, and those are just as important, as having solid pre-approval. So
Cool.
yeah,
Awesome.
nice to meet you guys.
You can clap. You need to stay up here. I knew you weren't gonna say very much, so there was actually a question for you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and it's very appropriate as our sponsor, whatever. Somebody asked, how can I work with Edge to fulfill my clients' needs?
Oh, I
So
love
what's
that. That is such a
Yeah.
great question. So I think a lot of times, we don't think as agents, I think in resale, we don't think about new construction as an option as much. I try to stay in front of as many agents as I can. There are a few of you in here I bug on a regular basis because I want to make sure that you know that we have product for your clients. A lot of times, like the Utah Housing, you know, the program that they have, the down payment assistance program is $20,000 that is zero interest for our clients. And it's only new construction, which is hard, you know, if you have a resale that you really like to help someone out with, but I have product that meets that need. And we have a 3% seller credit, which is amazing. And so even if I'm a little bit over $450, we can get that purchase price down and help people with the down payment assistance. But anyway, I think people tend to overlook new construction as an option and sometimes tend to try to pull teeth going through resale and can't find their clients what they're looking for. And I try to fill that need where I can. And we've got so many locations, so many product types, and so many price points that I think it just makes sense to at least expose your client to those things. Even if they end up going with something else, I think that there's so much to offer that it's worth an exposure. And what I find a lot of times, I had a client just 2 days ago, who was only looking at resale. They really didn't want to look at new construction. And they came and listed one of my developments because their agent brought them. And we signed a contract, we're under contract because it met their needs and they didn't even consider it beforehand. So I would say just considering new construction, and I will try to stay as ahead or in front of as many of you as want to be bugged and bothered on a regular basis. So I just try to make you aware of what specials I have, or, you know, what I'm trying to move, or possibly a pocket listing, something that's coming that nobody else knows about. I try to just, you know, keep you informed of what's going on, so. Yeah.
Okay, follow-up question. So if some people say, well, I can show my clients new construction, I look on the MLS and I see what's out there. Are they seeing everything that Edge really has?
No.
Or even what portion are they even seeing?
Right, so it's actually really interesting. I only have, for better or worse, for whatever reason, we only have maybe 1/10 of our inventory on the MLS. And so we have a sampling of listings on the MLS, but first of all, there are no pictures or very few pictures online, so you can't see what those specs that are maybe completed look like. And also, sometimes I have people stuck on Lehigh. I have to be in Lehigh. It's gotta be Lehigh. And then I take them around the corner to North Saratoga Springs and they're like, wait, it's $20,000 cheaper. The HOA is less. I love this location. I'm right next to Mountain View Corridor. So I actually think meeting in person, there's a huge, just like we are today, I think there's huge value in bringing your clients to me. So that I can sit down with your clients, assess their needs and help them. And even if it's not me in the end, I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that they know what's out there and that we've educated them together on what's possible so that they know what they have all the options in front of them.
And another thing that really makes you look good too as a professional, because they're gonna think, oh, I look online, everybody looks online, right? I've seen what's out there. All our clients are so smart, right? And so the fact that you now bring to the table other options that they wouldn't have known about and make introductions and stuff like that, that's what we should be doing. Protecting our clients in the transaction and giving them all the options possible so that they can.
Yeah, thank you. And one more thing, I think that anyone who's done a deal with me in this room can attest that if you bring me your client and we sit down together, I will take care of you, I will take care of your client, I will take it from there. And it doesn't mean obviously that you're not representing your client, you're not part of the process, but it's my job to be your wise guide and help you through that process and make it as smooth as possible for you as the buyer's agent so that we can make it a successful transaction.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Katie. Yeah. It's funny on that mic, when everybody claps all at once, it happens in my office, it cancels it out. So it just went quiet maybe, so that's. So what happens? I lost it. Okay, so we're gonna be talking about the market. So I wanna ask you guys a question. How many think we're in a good market? How many of you think we're in a bad market? That's, right? I mean, the market is the market. So it's kind of a trick question when people say, how's the market? How do you answer that? I mean, that's probably why you're here. We want more talking points on that, right? So let's look back. I mean, how many of you thought, what are some of the time periods I want to look at? How many of you thought we were in a bad market in 2006? Was that a bad market or a good one?
Most people thought it was good.
Most people thought it was good in 2006. Did they think the same thing in 2010, 2011? But was that a good market or a bad market?
2011 was
Yeah.
the best market ever,
Right?
because that was the most affordable.
How do-
it's been in
How do we know that?
20 years.
How do we know that? Did we know that in 2011? Were people really just jumping on real estate, or were they going, where's the bottom? It's been going down for 3 years, 4 years, it's gonna continue to go down. So there was still a lot of fence sitters even then, right? Did you guys find that? How many of you were in the market?
I think a lot of investors were jumping on real estate.
they were.
in 2011.
There definitely was a big transfer of wealth, right?
I think good or bad depends on what your goal is for what you're trying to achieve in the market.
100%, 100%. And either that could be your goal or it's your client's goal, right? So when they're asking you about the market, you really need to ask them questions. Why are you asking? What are your goals? What are your intentions? Are you a $500,000 a year earner or a $50,000 a year earner? So that dictates what market you're looking at too, right? In 2020, Lynn and I almost bought 2 office condos in Draper, just up the street from our office that we have now, for just shy of $650,000 each, built out. But it was 2020. And so there was uncertainty, there was, what's gonna go on? Do I really want more office space? You know, COVID, all that kind of stuff was going on, and we backed off. It wasn't 2 years later that they sold those last units in there for over $1 million without the build out. So we can tell a lot by looking back, right? And so it's all relative. How many of you hearing a lot of talk about the unaffordability of the market today? Right, that's a big thing too. Let me take you back to when I met Lynn in 1990 is when we got married. Interest rates were over 10%. We were in a recession, 90, 91. Minimum wage was $3.35 an hour. You can believe that. We were both working part-time minimum wage jobs and going to school. Some of you have heard this before, but our first filed joint tax return, grand total, $8,000.
Now that.
But we bought a house the next year because we wanted to buy a house next year. So the reason I bring that up is, who are we listening to that we're getting our advice from? The reason Lynn and I bought a house, we didn't ask anybody. We just did our own thing. We wanted to buy a house. So we were in the game, we were in the market. Long story short, we ended up putting together a seller finance transaction, and that started our investing career. And we built a pretty handsome portfolio of real estate. In fact, Jordy, I think Jordy Clark is on there. He's the new president of the Utah Valley Real Estate Investors Association. He just asked me yesterday to speak at their RIA group, February 15th. So if any of you want to like talk about buy and hold and real estate as an investment to, you know, for a secure financial future, come and check that out. We've got some good stuff to talk about. You guys ready? Okay, so I'm gonna start. I've got some questions for all of you, and these are the questions that you guys submitted, okay? But I'm gonna start with a couple that are kind of like apply to all of you. So the first one is, what are some strategies to help counteract the high interest rates in case the rates don't drop? What are some strategies people can do to get into the market?
I mean, I'm not a lender or, you know, well, actually I'm an agent, but I don't do a lot, but from what I've seen that's working for people as an appraiser, because I see a lot of different sides of transactions as an appraiser. What I'm seeing a lot is, I guess if, you know, the new term is like house hacking, or whatever you want to call it, but I'm seeing a lot of properties with income potential. You know, like a mother-in-law apartment in the basement that can supplement income, or an ADU in the backyard, or even, you know, I'll go appraise a townhome in, say, Utah County, where there's lots of single tech people. And, you know, I've appraised a few where someone has a $500,000 townhome or $400,000 townhome that has 3 bedrooms, and every bedroom has a separate bathroom. And the guy that owns it lives in 1 bedroom and a bathroom, and then he's got the other 2 rented out. And he's like, oh yeah, he's like, I pretty much live here for free and let the other guys pay my rent. So that like there's options for home ownership, even for first-time home buyers, with some supplemental income and different things that we've seen a lot. I think that's one thing. The other thing we're seeing a lot of is concessions, which Janine mentioned a little bit, with like Edge having, you know, 3%. And And when you're talking like $400,000 or $500,000 house, that's a pretty big concession. So,
Okay, Adam, or Andrew, since you're talking, I skipped a step. I didn't even let you guys introduce yourselves. So since you just had the floor there, I want each of you to just introduce yourselves. Not everybody knows your awesomeness like we do. So.
yeah, I'm Andrew O'Farrell. I work for Bodell Appraisers. I've been appraising residential real estate for a little over 20 years, and I love it. I love real estate. I've always loved real estate. Even when I was like 16 and would go to the grocery store and they had those little boxes with pictures of houses, I'd pick up the magazine every time I walked out of the grocery store, no matter where I went. And I just love looking at houses. And the crazy thing is I still do, like, you know, I always tell my wife, I'm like, hey, let's go to the parade of homes. Let's go. She's like, are you not sick of looking at houses? And it's kind of weird. Like I get sick of the paperwork and appraising. I don't get sick of looking at houses though. So I love real estate. I invest in real estate, own real estate, and kind of see everything. But my background's, I was talking to Corey, I'm a finance background and then been appraising for about 20 years. And so.
Awesome. Corey.
Corey Lewis, I'm with PRMI. I've been in the business in one capacity or another. I'm in my 30th year. I know I don't look old enough to be in my.
I don't feel old enough to have a job for 30 years either.
About 20 of those 30 years has been in more of the origination role, dealing with consumers as a loan officer or supporting loan officers, managing loan officers. For the last 13 plus years, I've been working with PRMI and obviously focusing on the origination side of things. But in my history, I've been an underwriter, I've been an operations manager. So I kind of understand, obviously better than some, the back end of the lending process. I've run secondary marketing for companies. So I kind of have a good grasp on how the industry works as a whole, which is really helpful to me in explaining to my clients, you know, what goes into mortgage pricing, why their loans are priced the way they are. It's not, so many people don't understand the factors that go into it. And I can explain that whole execution on the secondary side, which some want to know, some don't, but the ones that do, I love to educate them. I've bought my first house. I graduated from college in 1994 and bought my first house not long after with a roommate. That echo what Andrew's saying. It's the only way I could afford it. And then obviously you kind of parlay that up, and that's what I find and what I recommend to clients is to get into your first house. Sometimes you have to make concessions and not get your dream house. I have two boys that are nearly of home buying age, and talking to them, their expectations are, I want a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house on a 1/4 acre with a 2-car garage and a garden. And I'm like, yeah, and so does most middle-class families. It's exactly what they want. And you're a 22-year-old guy that wants that exact thing. So to me, it's get them into buying is a stair-step method to get to where you eventually want to be. So buy that first house, even if you have to make some concessions, or take on the sacrifice of having some roommates or renting out your basement, things that may not be ideal, but it gets you to your ideal situation.
Perfect. Steffanie.
Steffanie Ferguson, I'm with Real Advantage Title. Saturday, I just hit 21 years in the industry, so also started when I was 10.
I love that you have an anniversary.
It's weird, I'm a numbers person, so it's like, that's the day. So Saturday was the day. We did not celebrate, we were the resident room, but yeah, I just, for me, I got in the refi boom. I had come from my uncle's HVAC company. I often laugh that I feel like I've had I worked for two jobs in my adult career. I worked for his company for 6 years, and then came in, and when I got into title, everyone was like, you'll either love it or you'll hate it. And here I am 21 years later, and he started in a back cubicle. They brought me a stack of files and said, order a payoff. And I was like, what is that? And so I'm proud of myself, come a long way, started in the refi boom. So it's been really interesting. I love this job because there's enough continuity of things that happen, but every file is different. And so I love that about it. And I love people. I love watching people's dreams come through and being a part of that. And it really is, it's a great job. I love what I do.
Awesome. So sorry for the flip flop of starting with questions and then come back to the introduction, but any other comments on that first question as far as strategies? You've mentioned a couple, like buying a roommate, a college buddy or whatever. Anybody have any other input on that? Strategies to buy with these high interest rates and high prices, and people are like, how do I do this?
Well, another thing that I explain to clients is by buying, you're essentially locking in your house payment.
Right.
People forget that. Right now it's a stretch. Fast forward 5 years, if your career follows the trajectory of most careers, you'll be making more money than you are in 5 years, and that housing payment is more or less fixed. Your taxes and insurance may vary a little bit, but that principal and interest portion is either gonna stay the same, or in a best case scenario, we refinance you and it goes down. So the affordability should get easier as you progress through your career, but it's hard to imagine when you're sitting there and you envision yourself being house poor, that, you know, it's hard to project 5 years down the road and say, well, I should be making more money. I have promotions coming up. I have raises coming up. I'm adding supplemental income sources, and all that's going to make that house more affordable.
Well, your circumstances change, right? People's circumstances, we've all sat up here and yes, if you've set goals and you're working
Yeah.
towards setting those goals. We were talking about this earlier too. Not everybody wants to own a home. But those who do, you've got to at some point take the leap and take the jump and get in the game. And that's, I think, the hardest part of it. Once you're in and you kind of get your sea legs a little bit, you realize I'm going to be okay. You can change things, refi. You've got to get in. And while you're doing that, you're building equity. And that equity, like we've talked about countless times, is you start out and I don't know if this is the right thing, but being realistic about what you can afford. You know, everybody jumping in and they're like, I want the dream home. Well, we all want the dream home, right? But I've got, my sister-in-law, we just had this conversation. I said, when you bought your first car, you were so proud of the little, junky Subaru that you drove around and you got some new hubcaps on it and you fixed it up a little bit. And you were so proud, right? It had AC. So you were excited. Then you had that for a while. Then you moved up, right? Your circumstances changed and then you got yourself a nicer car. You drove that around for a while and you improved it. And then guess what you did? This year, you bought a 2020 and you got a Kia and it's got all the bells and whistles and you're so excited. But you build equity and your circumstance changed. That's exactly what you do with homeownership. If you've got to get in, well, I don't want to have a baby until I have, a house. Well, get a 2-bedroom condo and you have a nursery and you work towards those things. And so I think sometimes it's just having the right conversations of buy a townhome. A townhome is a wonderful place to start. And a lot of people, there's a great, market for those. Keep it if you want to have an investment, but get in the game because you're building equity as your circumstance change.
Nice, and that long-term vision of locking in that payment is crucial, and that's a conversation we have to have with our clients. That first property that Lynn and I bought, that was seller financing, we never even moved in it, we rented it out. It became our first investment property. The next year, we wanted a home to live in because we were still renting. We still couldn't qualify for a loan. And so talking about strategies and stuff, thank goodness, Lynn's parents co-signed for us. And I'm telling you, the house was a piece of shit. It was bad. I could go on and on about the comments that we got for buying this, but you know what? We bought what we could afford, not what we wanted, and we got in the game. And over time, we cleaned it up, we painted, we re-landscaped, and became a beautiful home that we could live in. And then it became a rental property later. So by just taking that action and doing what you can, it might feel like a stretch at the time. And some of these things your clients are worried about, right? It's like, oh, I'm only paying this much in rent. I'm gonna be paying this much more. But guess what? Rents along the counties along the Wasatch Front went up 36% since 2020. They've averaged over 11% over the last 10 years. How would you like to look forward to that? I mean, if you're gonna take a stretch to the payment that's coming anyway, if you keep renting, right? That payment's gonna come, get ahead of the game. It might feel like a little bit of a stretch. But like Steffanie said, as circumstances change, you set goals and then you adapt and you make it happen. Good, that's good stuff, guys. So along that same line, this one's similar. The question that was asked is, what conversation is the most effective in getting someone off the fence and getting them into seriously looking? So we talked about some strategies of mine, and that's a conversation. But what are the fence sitters worried about that we can talk to them about that might have them look at things a little bit differently and get in the game?
For me, it was that the market, I feel like, is primed for sellers giving concessions. Being in the industry and watching that not always be the case, to see the first buy down document come over and me going, $21,000? Like the seller's giving you $21,000 to buy this down. Call another lender, he's like, I've never heard of this before, let me do some research. And you start to see that our industry kind of helps self-correct itself a little bit, right? So to watch an interest rate go from 6% down to, 6.125, and now they're at 4.125. And now you've got 2 years to help your circumstance change, but worst case scenario, you're here. That was, I said that to my sister-in-law. She's like, what do we do? I said, I bet if you talk to your agent, I bet there's some seller concessions that you can do here. She's like, yeah, they're willing to, buy our rate down. I don't even have an idea what that means. I said, well, here's what that means. And the light comes on. It is, not everybody knows about these kinds of things. Sellers are willing to do repairs. They're willing, not everyone. And the market, interestingly enough, since I was asked to be on this panel, to where we're sitting today, is already shifted. Everybody can feel it. And I told my sister-in-law at the time, I said, if you do not buy, you will not get the house for the same price and you will not get that by them. Mark my words, they're locked in. And she's like, I think you were right. I'm like, I don't want to hear those words. I'm just happy for you, right? I think that there's a shift market, the increase in orders. Corey's talked about loan applications coming up. It's going to heat up. They're ready to get back in the game. They're excited. Spring's coming. So if you could get somebody in and use those seller concessions to your benefit and get that buy down, jump on it. It's huge. I just did a CD yesterday, 5.7, no buy down. Rates are coming down. I think that the market's just going to pick up and heat up in light of that.
Corey, you said something in our kind of like pre-panel Zoom call where we were all chatting and stuff like that. Do you remember what you said is the worst thing that could happen for buyers right now?
Is rates drop too fast.
If he said the worst thing is the exact same thing could happen, that people are waiting to happen, is rates drop too fast now.
Well, that's how I'm getting my clients off the fence. I'm saying, the worst thing that could happen to you is rates drop to 4%. While it would save you money, I'm fearful that we'll see a market we were in, a year and a half, 2 years ago, where you're competing with everybody and their dog, and you've got to pay.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's already starting.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna pay considerably more, and especially for these first-time homebuyers, that they might have 3% down. They might not have anything down. They're using Utah housing or some sort of down payment assistance. Those people are out of the market because they don't have 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 to pay above appraised value. So I use it as, jump in now, because when rates do come down, which I think they will eventually, you're gonna have more and more people. It's already starting to happen. We're already starting to see more and more people come back to the market. I mean, just the first part of January, I've seen my apps up, tick up well above what they were, any given 2-week period in 2023. So it's already starting. I think they use the year end as their trigger. Hey, new year, new me, I'm gonna go buy a house. It's time to start talking. It's time to start talking to lenders. It's time to start meeting with my agent and getting things going. So again, the more people that start jumping in, the more competition and the more prices are going to go up. And great, you've got a 4% interest rate on a house that you'd never bought.
Yeah. That's so true. And when we were talking about that, it's like, when you're having this conversation with your client and they're saying this, well, I'm waiting for rates to drop. Would they rather refinance when the rates drop at today's purchase price? Or do they want to be a buyer with everybody else? Because the rates dropped and now people did get off the fence and they're in the game and now they're the competition. Janine says she's seen it already and the rates aren't as low as they might go, right? So it could get worse and you have to anticipate that. So what are your options? I mean, rates are either going to go up or down, right? So if they don't come down, they stay stagnant, we know prices are still going to go up. Do you know that everybody agrees we have a housing shortage here in Utah, right? Particularly in the Los Angeles front. It's gonna increase in 24, whatever we said. Builders aren't building like they used to. They're still building, but they're definitely not keeping up with demand. Our deficit is gonna raise over 34,000 family units in 2024. That's a deficit. I mean, just to catch up, look, it's gonna take years and years. So
and that's what I use to combat, because obviously we all hear, I'm gonna wait till the market crashes. My uncle says wait till the market crashes because prices are going to come down. These prices aren't sustainable. And I just say, what makes you think that? Simple economics, if there's one item for sale and 10 people that want to buy it, why would that seller drop their price?
I think that's what we've heard the most is, I'm gonna wait till prices go down. And so I think the interesting thing is if we look at the last 18 months, the market peaked in April of 22. And basically the last 3 months before April of 22, we saw like a 10% jump in the market within like 2 or 3 months. And then after April of 22, we saw like a 10% drop in the market in like 2 months. And basically it's just, if you go from January 22 to say like June or July 22, you could draw a straight line to prices. But there was just this big peak in the middle. But other than that, since July of 22, after that first initial like 10% drop when the like 8 rates shot up, like housing really hasn't changed in price. You know, we have some normal, I think Steffanie said, you know, it's always better to buy in the winter, not spring. If you wait, she mentioned if you wait till spring, you're gonna have a harder time buying. Like we see some fluctuation in prices between like winter and spring. And if you look historically, like if you buy in December, you're probably getting a better price than you are if you're buying in April, just overall. But we haven't seen a drop in prices over the last 18 months. And we've had interest rates as high as, you know, up as high as like 8%, you know, upper 7s, 8, and we still didn't see a price drop. So now the rates are in the upper 5s, low 6s. I think you mentioned a 5.7. We're probably not going to see prices drop. If you look historically at any recession over time, we've only had one major recession where prices have taken a significant drop. And that was 2007, 2008, where the whole recession was caused by the housing crisis. Like that whole thing was created by housing. But every other recession historically, usually, you know, you may see a 2%, 3, 5% drop, but like nothing significant really over time. And we're just not seeing that now. We're seeing like prices and supply and demand that is still way out of whack. I don't know what the exact numbers are. I mean, you mentioned a 30,000 unit housing shortage. I've heard anywhere from 40 to 50,000 that we're already behind. And a lot of that is we still haven't caught up from 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. Like our population still grew and no housing was built. So we're still like 50,000 units behind from what we were 10 years ago. And we just can't catch up and now it's almost worse. I mean, we still have the population growth naturally and organically in Utah, but then you also have, you know, a huge population of people moving here. So like that demand is just increasing and the supply is not increasing as fast. And you know, it's pretty like simple economics.
One thing too is I worked on a relocation account for many, many years. And all of them that come in, they are so jazzed about Utah. They're like, I get double the house. My taxes are nothing, especially the ones coming from back east. They're like, taxes are nothing. I get double the home. I have a property. And so for them, I think it becomes one of those, it's all relative. What is affordable, right? For Utahns who've lived here our whole lives, we're like, that's expensive. For other people coming in, they're like, I'll take that one, I'll take that one, and I want that one too. I could buy 2 homes for, you know, what it was costing Merritt and the property taxes. I mean, some of them pay $22,000 a year in property taxes. So you show them the $5,000 bill and they're like, so is this quarterly? And over here, we're like, oh, $5,000, like that's steep. And for them, they're like, super, I'll take 2. I'm so excited. And that's all I have to pay in taxes. So we do kind of have to think about who's coming in and what that changes for us,
Sure.
you know?
And I think you guys all kind of touched on that. The supply and demand should be kind of like a forefront of our conversations because that runs all business, right? I mean, all markets, all businesses are run by, like Corey said, if 10 people want it, the price isn't coming down if there's only one of them, right? They might say no to that full price offer and say, you know what, this is kind of popular. I'm going to raise the price on that. So supply and demand is crucial. And today's price seems really high. But you know what? Look back through history. How many of you pull up stats and look at data and look at graphs and look at the chart and look at the incline of real estate over here? Can you identify?
The last 10 years stats right here.
Yeah, awesome.
Just the
Let's get to that. I was gonna ask you kind of a general question. How many of you could pinpoint any year in the last 30 years that you wish you wouldn't want compared to where they are right now? I mean, you talk to any investor and their 2 biggest griefs is, I wish I never would have sold and I should have bought more. That's because we're looking back, we're looking at history. So talk to that, Danny. You got some stats there on the property.
I think one thing you should talk about supply and demand, and I just think back like when you take your real estate classes and they talk about, you know, a short supply or an oversupply or like a market that's in balance. And I don't remember, like if a market's in balance, what are typical marketing times? I don't know. Do you guys remember? Like I'm pretty sure.
Days on market, you mean?
Yeah, what like a typical house to sell in a balanced market where there's like equal buyers and sellers. I think you're 3 months, right? It was always like 3 to 6 months. Yeah. So, but like right now, in the winter, actually, let me get this one wrong here. So, days on market for December of 23, the last full month we have was 40. So just based on like days on market and how fast houses are selling. You know, stuff still, like that kind of shows we still have more demand than supply. We're technically still in a seller's market. I feel it's pretty balanced right now. But we're still in only like, you know, it's still 30 days or less to sell your house. And most appraisals I see, like most contracts are in the first 5 to 10 days. You know, that days on market is stretched out just because it's, you know, an average, but that means half the houses are selling for less than that. You know, they're selling it under 30 days, and that's in the middle of December. You know, you go to, let's see, even like June of last year, days on market was 21, like average. So, but like most houses that are priced competitively, you're still selling it. I just talked to Lynn, she told me like they priced a house in Sandy, you know, sold, you know, you're right under contract. So we're still a huge shortage in supply, and there's not really any signs of prices going down, so.
So pricing right is a key. So you probably see it too, the ones that 5 days on the market, 4 days on the market, and it's like, yeah, they priced it right. That's why it's moving so fast. The ones you're doing that have been on the market longer, you probably see it.
Yeah, usually see price reduction, yeah, for
They
sure.
were maybe a little over optimistic.
Yeah, usually, and a lot of them, we'll get a contract and I'll be like, oh yeah, like, as soon as they hit like the price it should have been at, like, it's selling within a week or two.
With multiple offers too, they're coming in, and
Yeah,
they're like, oh, I've got multiple offers on this one, everyone's like, what do you mean? And
Yeah,
that's the whole conversation is, we priced it right. There was still wiggle room, right? Sellers are still getting what they want, buyers got it at a fair price, and there was still room to give some concessions on things.
Super cool, all good stuff. Okay, I'm gonna move the title a little bit.
Such an interesting.
Well, from our conversation, I think there's a lot of stuff people don't understand about title. And what your roles are. So we did get some questions. So what are some of the common misconceptions about title companies' role in the transaction?
A lot, but one of them is we really are a fiduciary. We're in representing all parties, and I think people get a little confused on thinking that that's just agents and lenders. And truly, we're there to represent and make sure that the buyers and sellers, it is a little confusing because who pays for the policies versus who's getting the policies? And we are an insurance company. We do an escrow service, but we issue title insurance policies, and there's so much more that goes into, you know, in making sure that these properties are insurable and what we need to do that. So buyers and sellers are included in on that. And I feel like sometimes there's this veil of like, don't contact the title company, you know, so for me and for us, we do a lot of interaction with the buyers and sellers, especially now with all the fraud that's going on. We would like them to know that they're paying for our services and we're here to help them out, and they're a client too. They're actually the ones paying for our services.
Awesome. So you caught that, right? They're an insurance company first. It's all about the underwriting and the insurability and the property and making sure that the lenders protect it.
Yeah.
Well, and the owner. There's an owner's policy and an owner's policy, right? Okay, that's awesome. Anybody, you guys have any
I think
comments
one
on
thing,
title?
like for title, for me is I think a lot of times we forget that, I don't know all the title rules, but do you guys have attorneys like on staff? Like,
Yeah.
so like they're, like she said, like they're more than just someone doing paperwork. I think sometimes we think, oh, they're just the person that does the paperwork for our closing, but really like they're covering like the whole legal responsibility of the transfer of title. I mean, you know, making sure money where it is going, where it's supposed to and all that. So, and most of, I don't know what the requirements are. Maybe they all have to be an attorney. I don't know,
No.
but yeah,
it is
but
nice to have-
most of them have like attorneys on staff or own the companies and are, you know, so like for legal liability and protection, like the title company is a huge part of that.
We're asked to play a lot of different roles too, right? Like we have to know the lending side, the contract side, and it's not up for us to interpret what that looks like, but there's just a lot of information that we learn over time. And I feel grateful that I've had a lot of supporting partners who've been able to help, you know, get me through that, because it can get a little sticky, but at the end of the day, we get, I would say 99.9% of the transactions done and closed, and it's just having the experience and knowing who to reach out to and talk to about that, because it can get a little sticky.
Well, if you have any comments on that?
Just that you know you're working with a good title company. If anybody's had the unfortunate situation of dealing with a property with title issues, or a borrower with title issues, judgments that need to be cleared, name mix-ups, working with somebody who gets that cleared for you in a timely manner and is proactive in getting those cleared, it's critical, because otherwise it can it can send a transaction sideways really quickly.
I have another question for you later. We'll come back to that. But Corey, we're always talking about the interest rates. That's the theme of today. And everybody wants to know where they're at.
Well, I mean, obviously.
You can rub my head.
But look, again, when we're in the middle of a transaction, short-term interest rates are really critical, right? When we're under contract, the next 30 days is what we're focusing on. We're not worrying about 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, or years down the road. So 2 different timeframes. I mean, obviously, if you're looking at a 30-day window, we've had 2 really rough days in the bond market. Rates have worsened over the last 2 days. And again, just based on a Fed member's statements, it can move a market negatively. Yesterday, we got an order to lock. We lost, 45, 50 basis points. We started today down. And what that means is rates are worse than they were a couple of days ago. Not significantly, but a little bit. So looking short term, it's really hard to diagnose what's going to happen in the next 30 days, what's going to happen in the next 60 days even. But if you take a longer look, rates are expected to come down. I read a stat just the other day, actually, that, we all know the Fed, we all hear the Fed funds rate. I think it's at 5.5 currently. So we all hear what's the Fed going to do and what's the Fed doing in their Fed funds meeting. So I don't know if everybody understands why the Fed raised interest rates. Inflation was getting out of control. We all felt it, right? We all felt it every time we bought anything. The reason the Fed raises interest rates, as morbid as it sounds, is they want to squash the economy. They want companies to stop growing. They want people to get laid off. They want consumer spending to slow. So they raise interest rates to try to slow the economy and essentially hurt the economy, because the only way if the consumers keep spending, prices keep going up. So what we're talking about with real estate, same happens with every consumer good. So they raise interest rates to try to make it more expensive to borrow. They make it more expensive for everything. Companies aren't expanding. Layoffs are happening. So they're essentially trying to squash that. And with that, inflation comes down and interest rates come down. So with the Fed's expected to, of course, we've all heard about the hikes that we went through over the last year plus. Eventually they're going to start dropping the Fed funds rate, and that's expected in 2024. There's a 68% chance that we'll see our first cut on the March 20th meeting. There's a 94% chance that they'll cut at least 50 basis points by May 1st. And there's a 100% chance that the cuts are going to come by June 12th. So looking out longer term, absolutely, rates are going to come down. Are they going to come down to 3-4%? I don't think so. And what I tell my clients, they're like, do you think rates are ever going to get down there? I said, we don't want the economic events that are going to push rates to 2s to 3s again. It's going to be another pandemic. It's going to be a recession. It's going to be a world war. It's going to be something that we don't want to live through, just to have a little bit better interest rates. Like I talked to a client last night and I said, you've got a great job, great stability, great income trajectory, and your interest rates aren't that great. Your trade-off would be instability in your job, less wage growth, but you got a 4% interest rate. Which would you prefer? I'd rather have income stability and know that I'm going to grow over the next several years versus having a great interest rate today. So long term, yeah, they're going to come down. All indications are we're going to see rates drop in 2024, 2020, 2025, and 2026. That's the long-term prognosis. They're not going to drop as fast as everybody wants. I mean, 5.7 is amazing.
Yeah,
I
I was pretty impressed.
The per Freddie, I think the other day, the average in the market was 6.75 with a cost of like a half point. So, when anybody asks you to quote an interest rate, it's like, well, anybody who quotes you an interest rate without knowing the specifics of the deal, you should run away really fast because they do vary. I mean, we're still seeing stuff in the 7s. We're seeing stuff touch the 5s, depending on the independent scenarios. So, but to answer your question, rates are going to come down over the long term. I wouldn't bank on having a better interest rate in February than you do today. A lot of the experts predict we're going to live in the 6s and maybe even the low 6s through the end of this year as an average. So, but yeah, long term, we're going to be in a better interest rate environment going forward if you project out far.
Yeah, again, it's a game of choices, right? I mean, if you're projecting interest rates come down and people are waiting for that event to happen before they get in the market, they're giving up other things too, like potential equity, right? And so giving your clients options so that the last thing you want to hear your clients say is, I wish you would have told me that sooner.
Yeah.
It's like, why didn't we talk about that? You need to lay out all the options. You need to connect them with the professionals that can give their opinion and everything. So they have the information, and inevitably, what do they say? Well, what would you do? You know, but you're not them, and so their circumstances are individualistic to them, and again, like I said before, would you rather refinance if they come down to, you know, lower 4s or 5s or whatever, or you wanna get in the game with that fund with everybody else? And so, what is it, 61% of all mortgages are below, right now we're under 4%.
Yeah.
It's like 88% or under 6%. Is that right? Right?
Well, that certainly sounds right, yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, one more thing pertaining to rates, because we are in an election year, I always thought this too, and I have clients saying, hey, we're in an election year, rates are gonna come down. Because the current administration is going to want to push rates down, they're gonna encourage the Fed to push rates down, to push up votes, to look like, you know, so. It was honestly, that conversation's been happening a lot, you know, heading into the election season, and one of our sources actually kind of researched it, which was really cool. It went back to 1972.
Yeah.
And election years have little to no impact on interest rates. Whether it go in Democrat, Republican.
Yeah, but what about 1960?
But so going back, which I mean, well, that's a 50-year look back.
Right.
There's very little fluctuation. If you go the year before the election, year of the election, and the year after, there's very little fluctuation in interest rates. But if you would have asked me just, you know, off of what I thought, I would have been like, oh yeah, rates get better around election time. They truly don't. So I thought that was an interesting stat that because again, it goes against what probably the majority of the people have thought their whole
Well,
lives.
I think too, a conversation piece is the rates that we just had, for those of us who've been in the industry for a while, I mean, the lowest rate I closed during COVID was 1.99. If you would have asked me if we would have ever seen that, I'm pretty sure I have said, there's no way that rates will ever go that low. And they did. That is not normal. That is not a normal. That I think was a blip, an anomaly. I mean, there was a lot of things that happened during that time that we'd all never thought would happen and see happen.
Well, the
During
federal
the
government was
refi boom.
buying all the mortgage-backed securities,
Yeah,
and so there was no competition.
it was
So
crazy.
they started tapering their purchasing of mortgage-backed securities, and we immediately saw rates start to climb.
Yeah, I mean, that is not a normal rate. And so I think that bears worth having. You know, there's this younger generation, they're like, I want that rate. Well, we all want that rate. We all want it to come back. The chances are, I've heard, I don't either personally, but, you know, the rates were at 5%, 5.25 in the refi boom when I got in, 5.25. I think they touched down to like 3.75. That was low. So I think it almost is like, that was a great rate. This is like the unicorn rate, right? It came, it went, we just see the glitter that's left behind in the wake. And if you got one, that's fantastic, but don't hold out waiting for that to come, because it might not come again.
Well, I think it's important, like the ramifications we saw, 3% interest rates, is if interest rates are 3%, we also saw 25% appreciation every year. So, and that's what, you know, your 50 offers, you're overpaying, you're having to come up with cash. Like there's so many issues with 3% rates that it never should have happened.
What
But
was
that
the-
would get a good political, but that never should have happened, you know, but.
Well, statistically, how many of those people, what was it, like 80% of them, 70-something% that bought the house during that rush weren't actually happy with the house that they overpaid for?
Yeah.
So
Now
they
you
got
go-
in
you
and
go
they
see a
bought this house that they overpaid for, they got a heck of a rate, and now they're locked in this house and they're like, well, I guess we'll figure it out.
And they paid 20,000 over appraisal.
Right,
Yeah.
so now they're waiting
Yeah,
out, they're playing
everyone was
longer
mad at
games,
appraisers
right?
back then.
Playing longer games. So, I mean, I bought at 9%. I was an A+ client, great borrower, and I was thrilled. So,
Well, I find
I am
there's
old.
two classes of buyers.
Right.
There's those that are, let's just call them the mid to later 20s into the early 30s who have only been paying attention. They started paying attention when rates are in the 2s and 3s. That's all they've ever known. It's all they ever heard. And then there's the people who are the generation before who heard about their parents having 14, 16, 18% interest rates and bought at 9, 10, 11. They hear 6.75 and they're like, I'm in.
yeah,
You know, but you talk to some, a 20 or 30 something that only is known 2s and 3s, you tell them 6 and they're like, when did this happen? You know, they've only been paying attention since we had that little anomaly in our history.
That's so true. It's all relative. It's like, where are they getting their information? How far are they going back? Are they looking at the big picture? Are they looking at a short-term window? Because let's be honest, I mean, if you bought a house in the last 10 years, you couldn't have screwed up.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have bought anything and paid any price and it's worth a hell of a lot more now, right? I mean, I was watching investors that were doing flips. The only reason they were making money is because of appreciation.
Yeah.
Because I was seeing what they were paying for them, it's like, but the market saved it for them. So, you know, they gotta change their strategy a little bit now, huh?
Well, back to that fence sitting question. Ask, is this a buy and hold strategy? Is this if the strategy should be very different if somebody's buying in 2024 and plans to sell in 2025. Your strategy is gonna be very different than if somebody's saying, I'm gonna buy in 2024 and this is my 5-year home, then I'm gonna convert it to a rental. Because again, if you go back and look historically, I think if you go back, heck, I don't remember the statistic, 50, 60, 70 years, real estate has really only lost 2 years of that 50-year period. It's been flat, but real estate's a long, if you're holding, I mean, you know that better than anybody.
Yeah.
So if you buy to hold, can't lose. Can't lose. If you're an opportunistic flipper or somebody say, hey, I got a good price, I'm gonna sell next year, yeah, you got a lot of risk on your.
Well, there's a big difference between speculation and investing, right?
Correct.
You know, there's day traders and then there's Warren Buffett, doesn't sell anything. You know,
Yeah.
you buy and just keep it forever, right? So agenda and why you're doing what you're doing is super critical. We gotta ask those questions. We gotta find out why they're doing what they're doing. Because if you wanna buy a rental property, if you can buy a property and somebody else is gonna pay for it, do it. What else are you considering? Right? If your plan is to stick that in your portfolio for your retirement someday, right? Lynn and I think our first 8 properties didn't cash flow. But it didn't matter. Somebody else was paying for them. We had a lot of other
Funny enough,
advantages.
we were like, hey, let's buy. We're like, is the market rate, you're ready to buy it? Softened a little bit. It was what, a year and a half ago? And my husband, God bless him, and I let him take the lead on this. When there was a property, finally came up for sale. She went to a retirement home. First offer, he comes in, he's like, Miss Robinson loves you, you've shoveled her walks for years, and she wants to give you first dibs at her home. Give her a fair offer. My husband, not listening to me, I was like, this is a fair offer, let's take the offer. He's like, it's 10,000, I'm like, and this is one of those things that I talk about. And it's $10,000, yes, it's a lot of money, and I don't wanna give away 10,000, I'd love a gift of 10,000, but 10,000, in the grand scheme of things, when you spread that out, really isn't much, right? We let it go for 10 grand. And now my husband's like, we probably should have bought it. I'm like, probably, or 1000% should have bought it. And now here we are, and we don't have that home. And what's 10 grand? We would have made that up by now in what we would have gained in having that property. So even having all the experience and having all of those things at your hand, there's still that trigger pull that sometimes it can be really scary. But guess what? Most people end up sitting where I am with regrets.
You guys need to steal stories like this and share them with your clients.
It's
If you don't
the
have your
best.
own personal experiences like this, use somebody else's and tell that story because he made that decision on today.
Yes. And I
Oh, I'm not
said,
gonna overpay.
he's like, that, it's not worth that. And I lovingly said, it's worth what somebody's willing to pay. And there are multiple offers on this and we can get this. No, like, we can get this. It's here for us. He's like, babe, I just don't know. I said, okay. I love you. And we decided not to.
So we need to extend the timeline of the discussion out. It's like,
Think
you're saying
longer,
it's not worth that $10,000 now, but what if we own it 20 years from now?
which we will.
Exactly, what's the plan? Lynn,
Love
I use our first property just because it was our first property and we were just young punks and didn't know what we were doing. But we paid $48,500 for that townhome, the first one we bought. And so I always pose the question, what if we would have paid 55? And I say that because like 2 years later, my dad passed away and my mom had a small little amount of cash that I tried to preserve for her and they were selling for 51. But I paid 48.5 and I could not get her to buy that property. Big regrets today, big regrets today. So it's all relative. If we would have paid 55, if we would have paid 60 today, we're looking back and say, oh yeah, people say, well, I would too. It's like, no, you wouldn't.
Yeah. It's all relative, right?
Then.
It's all relative. And
Yeah.
it's money and it's scary and it's taking that leap. So when you're talking to these, it is real. Fear is real and it's scary and that leap is terrifying. And the last thing you want to do is get somebody in something. But if they get into the right property and they can work on building the equity, I feel like if you want to own a home, you won't regret it. I've never had somebody come back and say, the worst thing I ever did was buy this house and live my best life and thrive. And guess what? Financially, most people can figure things out. There's a lot of things we can cut out in our lives that are white noise, if you will. And if you really want to own a home, jump in. You're gaining equity, and most people, everybody in this room has a story of somebody called and said, I'm so grateful I listened to you. And I did it when I did, because I wouldn't be able to afford that home now. And we all have those stories, and I think it's just building that trust and just getting them in the right place for their circumstance now, but realizing that there is opportunity to grow and to get in something different.
Ask them, ask your clients, how many of them were thinking about buying in 2018, 2019, 2020, but they were fearful the prices were too high? Now they're looking back and say, I wish I would have done it then, right? Because they're looking back. So today is tomorrow's past, guys. You need to at least put the concept in their head that 2 years from now, they might be looking back on today with some regret. And so we can only really control our circumstances today. If I get pre-qualified with Corey, he's like, here's your options. This is what you can do. Or he's gonna say, we can better your purchasing power, your options if you do this, this, and this. So there's some strategy involved there, but it's like, if I can do this now today, that's all I can control. If we're gonna speculate and say, well, maybe things will change in my favor in the next year or two, and I'm gonna do even better. So speculation is what, that's what kills people from taking action. That's awesome. So Andrew, let's do an appraisal question. Are you seeing a shift in the concession sellers are agreeing to?
Yeah,
More or
for
less?
sure.
What's that look like?
They just keep getting higher and higher, to be honest. I mean, which I know Janine said they're starting to see multiple offers, so maybe concessions will start coming back down a little bit, but all these builders want to stay in business. Edge is still building homes. I know some other people at some larger home builders pretty close, and they're like, we're gonna sell houses and this is how many we're gonna sell this year, and we're gonna make it happen no matter what it takes. So I think new construction concessions are really good. Without question, almost every new construction I see is like, $15,000, $20,000 concessions. I think, and it's important for people to realize what that means too on the concessions. I mean, Corey's the lender guy, so he probably knows way more about this, but say rates are 6%. With a $20,000 concession, you could probably buy that down to 5%. Like permanent, and I think a lot of people, and then permanently you could buy that down to 5%, I think.
Yeah, give a couple of different schools of thought there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I mean, like, I don't want to speak for lenders,
You bet.
but I think just for people to realize like, hey, like that 5.9% interest rate sounds good, but with the $20,000 concession, I can get 5.1. And then like people think, well, 5.1, that's pretty good. I mean, rates were 7.5, that's 2.5% less than they were 6 months ago or a year.
It went up to 8 and came back down. So
Yeah, it feels a little better. But yeah, definitely seeing a lot of concessions.
Didn't you tell me that on average you're seeing 20,000 plus?
I don't know about averages, but definitely, but seeing it very regularly.
So, well,
Like 15 to 20.
a builder is typically offering,
Yeah,
right? How many of you are asking for that?
and we're seeing it on existing stuff as well. I mean, it's, people selling houses want to sell. If you're listing right now, you want to sell your house. I mean, most people that are on the fence are not, they're gonna wait to sell a house, and they're like, I'm locked into my 3% interest rate, I'm not listing. But if you're listing a house, the other thing too is people listing houses right now, for the most part, have a ton of equity. So if they want to sell, like, they have a ton of equity to mess with. I mean, so a lot of them are like, hey, I need my cash, like, I'm willing to give up 20 grand on concessions to get rid of this house. So,
Well, and we're seeing, unfortunately, and maybe it's just the times, almost every file or every other file, there is a death or a divorce. And there are a lot that are happening. And so I've said this, even in the worst of times, circumstances for people's lives always change. And some people, there will always be reasons for people to sell or to refi. And we are, interestingly enough, we're seeing an uptick in refis. I think people have spent, things have not, not everybody's celebrating a great year, and people are refinancing, and they've got equity to be able to play with. And that's a gift, right? Thank goodness that you've got your equity there, and they'll refi again. They're getting their payment consolidating, and they're still being able to keep that home, paying off personal debt and keeping the home. And then they're just we'll start to see, I don't think we'll see the booms like we've seen before because of these buy downs. It's going to take a lot more, I think, and people's circumstances are all a little bit different. We will see an influx as rates go down, but if they slowly tick down, I think it won't be maybe the deluge that we've seen before coming in where everybody rushes to that gate. But at least when you have a home and your circumstances, if you need to dip into that equity, you have an option. And it's nice, you've got it there that you can refinance and take what you need out of it and better your circumstances.
Awesome, awesome. So, and Andrew, another very specific one for you. Now, this has to do with adjustments on appraisals, right? Because agents always get pissed off. It's like, but it's worth this, right? So, do you have any advice on how we can get a seller their money back from installing a $10,000 sump pump when they sell their house?
My thought would be the reason you needed the sump pump, like, if you need a $10,000 sump pump, you better put that in or you're never selling your house. Like, I mean, that just to get you to be a marketable house if you need that sump pump, but yeah, I don't know how you could market that.
So it's worth $25,000 less because it doesn't have.
But I think that's the same thing, like a lot of people will say, like, how, maybe just for, a lot of people say, oh, if I put a new roof on, how much is that roof gonna add to my house? And I'm like, putting a new roof on is gonna make your house just like every other house that's for sale that has a roof. But like if your house doesn't have the new roof and needs a new roof, like it's gonna be real, you're gonna take a way bigger hit for that. You know, people are gonna be like, oh, I need a $15,000 roof the day I move in. For one thing, FHA won't lend on it and conventional may be questionable depending on how bad. So it's like, you may take a $50,000 hit because someone's gotta have, like, because you won't put on a new roof. Like, it's like, maybe you just need to put on that new roof just to be able to sell your house. So
here's my comment on that, on concessions like that. If the buyer has to do it, they're doubling or tripling the price.
yeah.
Because it falls on them and it's not worth it as much.
So I will say this, if there's something we see in an appraisal that needs to be fixed, typically, like, there's no like set way to make, I mean, it's impossible to say this is gonna add this much value or take away this much value. But like, from what I've seen from doing 20 years of appraisals, typically, if there's something that needs to be fixed, whatever it costs to fix it, we're gonna deduct twice that in value. So like, if we say, okay, this needs a new roof, estimated cost to cure is $15,000. And then we're gonna say, but if this house has to sell as is with that roof and no one can fix it, then we're gonna take off $30,000 because there's gotta be some incentive to buy the house with the bad roof. I mean, that's just a simple example, but I agree. I think you're talking like, if something needs to be fixed, it's gonna cost you double in sales price. Unless we're in the same market we were in 2020 to 2022, then you know what, if it has a bad roof, add $50,000 and you're still. So, I mean, we've seen that market, but we're not that market right now.
But on the flip side, if your client does it, or you encourage them to get the home more marketable, it can almost double the value for what they spend to the potential buyer too, because they don't have to do it. It's done for them. Everybody wants that move-in ready. Some of our clients don't even want to suite, right? They don't want to start moving their stuff in there. So if they start making a list, and if they're bigger ticket items, particularly, what do they say? They say, let's keep looking. Let's see what else is out there. Let's find something that has a shorter list, right?
Yeah, especially right now where, you know, if something takes 30 days to sell, like, I mean, people have time to think and time to look at there's options on the market. So we've seen inventory down to 1,000 listings on the MLS and people don't have time to think, like that stuff doesn't matter, but like with more inventory, like you need to do that a little bit, so.
Yeah.
But as far as the sump pump specifically, like I said, I would assume if it needs a sump pump, like, it better have it.
It's better it has it than it doesn't.
Yeah, if it doesn't have it and needs one, that could be a problem.
So really, it's not gonna add value, but it could subtract.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would say if it's something like that.
It depends on how you calculate value, right? Because
Yeah.
less days on the market, maybe it
Right.
sells faster, maybe they get their price
Yeah.
versus not getting the price. So there is value there. It's just not the way that they're thinking of it. It's like, it cost me this much, where's my line item cancellation of that, right?
Yeah, and that, I mean, and then, like I said, assuming, I don't know, I mean, most areas we appraise that need sump pumps, every house has a sump pump, because if you don't have a sump pump, you have water in your basement.
Yeah.
So like, you know, I mean, if it was something that was expected in a house. So.
Okay, perfect, perfect.
I'm just
Okay,
glad you didn't ask about solar, so.
well, we are doing open Q&A. One more question, then we. I want to bring title back in, again. What should agents be looking for on a title commitment that they aren't?
I think it's really important to look at the Schedule A. And if you don't know what that is, call me and I'll show you how to find the Schedule A. The Schedule A holds so much information about, especially if you're a listing agent. I work with a lot of agents that are listing heavy, and there's so much information that it tells you about who's vested. You'd be surprised at, I mean, maybe you wouldn't. I am sometimes still surprised doing it as long as I had have that people aren't getting their contracts signed by the people that they need to actually have them sign. And I do think it's kind of funny that they call or that we'll have a conversation and I'm like, so does that mean they need to sign the contract? Yes, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. And if you, and I appreciate that you're calling me and that you trust me and respect me because you don't want to call your broker. But when in doubt, just call and ask a question about what that vested ownership looks like. Trusts can get tricky sometimes depending on who's on the trust. People passing away. I mean, if you know someone's passed away, this is real life story. Show up for a closing. I'm doing a courtesy. Granted, it was a courtesy. I go in, I sit down. I'm like, hey, are we waiting for so-and-so? Woman starts bawling. I said, I'm so sorry. Is everything okay? She's like, that's my husband. He recently passed away. That's why I'm selling. We hug. I tell her I'm sorry. But there's a lot that goes into that. If they're not honest joint tenants, there's a probate. There is a lot more questions that need to be had regarding what's going on there. So looking at your Schedule A and seeing what the vested ownership is, people think they're in LLCs. They're not in their LLC. People think they're in trusts. They're not in their trusts. There's a lot of things that we can find out and learn from the Schedule A. And the Schedule B2 is specific about the property. That is property taxes, judgments, debts, liens. People frequently don't understand that a home equity line attaches, we've just got one now, a $40,000 home equity line that they took out. And by the way, they're under contract to buy another home. And they're saying, I need this equity out. I'm like, well, you took that equity out when you took out your home equity line and you maxed that out. Well, that doesn't attach. It does. And so there's just questions that if you don't know that, that's okay. I do. And your title company should, if you're working with a true professional, and they should. And there's a lot of really good title companies out there. I work with them. I appreciate them. We're colleagues and I love them. Call them and ask them those questions. We like to send out an email that kind of going over some of that, but the Schedule A and the B2, that's specifics about that property. And there's other parts in there that are important to know about title policies and things like that, but those are going to be your highlight reel. I do suggest, looking into those and finding out. Federal tax liens, huge problem. People don't realize, and those can take sometimes 14 to 30 days to get a payoff for those. And they're multiple years and they have to be paid. So there's just a lot of things. ORS, there are continuing lien. So that, yes, there are a lot. And we see them. And it really is about education and just kind of knowing what to look for and where to look for it. And I'm happy to help or just tell you that the Schedule A and the B2.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely need to be looking those over. And I think your checklist when you take a listing should include, checking vesting, are the right parties signing the listing agreement, or you don't even have a valid listing agreement, right? And so anyway, those are some things that do come up.
LLCs are one of the most, people set up their LLCs and they don't know how to operate them. And it's really, really fascinating to me when they call and I'm like, hey, you've got 3 members on this LLC. Well, that doesn't matter. I can sign for the LLC. I'm like, super. It doesn't state it anywhere here. Can you send me your articles of incorporation or, anything that you've got? They send it to me. I review it. I'm like, tell me specifically where that states in your documents that you can do that. Nowhere. So for the entire term of their entire LLC, they have not been operating it correctly. The reason that that's a problem is if one of those LLC members gets upset or finds out that there's some contention or they didn't want to sell anything like that, that can turn into a lawsuit. They can come back. And if one party has liquidated something that they didn't want, it can really get pretty complicated. So you'll find that most title companies will make them sign or do a resolution, but they don't understand what they're actually operating and how to operate it. So ask and see those documents, because most of the time when we get them and there's 3 members, there's 1 member who's been signing everything, and that could be a liability for everybody.
Perfect. Okay, we're gonna open it up for some Q&A now from you guys. Is there anything in the chat on Zoom? You guys on Zoom, if you have a question, we'll try and get to it. Just put it in the chat. And we have Ashley here monitoring that, and we'd love to ask that question so you can get that answered. But, thanks, guys. I mean, that's a lot of good information, a lot of information. So what didn't we cover? What did you think of during this thing, or your question that didn't get answered? Kitty?
I have a question for Stephanie. One of your answers include the phrase with all the fraud that's happening. I'm curious what fraud is happening. What can we be keeping our eyes open for?
Seller fraud is huge. Wire fraud is huge. It is still surprising to me, and it just happened on another closing that we had. We send all of our wiring instructions out. We use certified, which gives us wire fraud protection. I'm really specific on how we deliver that. Tell the buyer, they're sitting there right in front of me. I'm like, hey, here's the wiring instructions. Don't go off of this. Oh, I'm sending them to my mom. Let me just get her information and I'll just send her certificate. No, I'm just gonna send this to her. I'm gonna send her a text. She knows to follow this. So texts, sends it to her. Please call them. I told her. I'm like, okay, great. Just have her call me. 30 seconds. She calls me after she sent the wire. Hey, this is so-and-so. I'm sending those gift funds. I sent the wire, but I'm really concerned because when I put the information in, the address came up weird. I'm sorry, you sent the wire? Yes. Okay, I'm sure you're gonna be fine. It's just the routing number. You've got this routing information. Were you given the instructions to call before? Yes, but I just didn't have the time. And so I'm calling you now. I think the funds have already left my account. I'm like, we're fine. We got the money, but it is still shocking to me how many times people just get in a hurry, and we live in a time where everything's just so immediate. Just make some calls. Wire fraud is actually more rampant now. It went from, when this first started out, from a couple million, we're billions already into, I mean, it's happening on such a high level. Payoff fraud is huge. People don't know that. It's huge. It almost put a title company out of business. They're getting more money in one grab. So it's very real, all of these things. So when you are having conversations with your client and saying, hey, this is a trusted professional that I work with. Most of my agents that I work with have a group email and they send a contact information of all the parties involved with their contact information. So it at least puts them on notice, and when we have to interact with them, they're like, oh, Steffanie, I think I've heard that name, Real Advantage. They know that that's coming over. So we like to have an open dialogue and having these conversations so that when they come and meet me, it's not the first time that they've seen my name or seen my email, or, you know, not all of them. Most times they meet for the first time and that's great, but at least there's an open dialogue. There is a lot of fraud going on out there and they're getting smarter and more sophisticated. So just be careful.
Ready for another question? I was gonna say, Corey, what's your take on long-term buy down or short-term buy down? Maybe what's the difference, or when somebody comes in to talk to you, what's your take?
Again, there's pros and cons to both. 2-1 buy downs were a thing of, I mean, gosh, that was, we saw it a bunch back in the old days, and then it disappeared. It disappeared for a long time. And then we saw a resurgence of it as rates went up. I know Andrew and I have kind of had a side conversation on this, but I'm a fan of the temporary buy down, and reason being, I think organically rates will get to. So if you're buying from a 6.5 to 4.5, it's not inconceivable that we could end up organically close to that over the next couple of years. The benefit of the temporary buy down, and I don't know how many people know this, but if you do a temporary buy down, and let's say rates do drop, somebody pays on your behalf $21,000 to do a 2-1 buy down, they're essentially supplementing your interest payments is how they buy that down. Let's say they bought you down from a 6.5 to a 4.5, and rates organically hit 5% late this year. Not saying that would happen, but if that happened and they refinance, they get credit for all those unused funds. So those unused funds that were essentially deposited, let's call it, for lack of better terms, an escrow account to supplement that interest, go to reducing their payoff. If you do a permanent buy down and you spend the 21 grand to buy it down, that's sunk. So if you refinance a year from now and you saved $4,000 in interest savings over that year, you spent the 21, 17 of it's gone. It's evaporated. So now not to say I use it pretty regularly. It's not uncommon to see discount points in this market, but it's usually on a smaller basis. It's like, hey, I can lock you in today at 6.75, but there's an anomaly in the rate sheet for a 40 basis point buy down. I can get you to 6.25. So then it would be obviously it's a permanent buy down, but you're risking less. If I thought we were in what was going to be a flat rate environment for the long term, or even an increasing rate environment, I'd be more of an advocate of the permanent buy downs. But temporary buy downs are a good solution to help affordability. You still qualify on the fully indexed rate, the full rate. So it's not gonna help you qualify for more, but it does make that payment, easier to stomach and the affordability there. So there's a place for both. But I'm not an advocate of spending tons and tons of money on a permanent buy down right now, because I think that there's a good chance rates will get through organically, and that would be could be a waste of some of your funds.
It's good information. That's why we leave lending to lending professionals.
Yeah, that's a good point right there, Andrew, is none of you should be explaining that to your clients. Don't even try. Just,
And again, I'm shooting from the hip, but I think a 2-1 buy down costs about an average of 2.25 points. So when people are saying, hey, concessions, they're gonna kick in 3%, and the seller's banking on, or the buyer's banking on that covering all of their closing costs and the buy down, there's usually not enough there, especially if it's a program where we're limited to like a 3% concession as a total. So I always tell people, let's weigh all the options and see what's truly the best. What's gonna get you the most bang for your buck? Keeping your own money in the bank might be the best bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Supplement your own 2-1 buy down. If you don't, or supplement your own buy down, if you're not getting enough to do a traditional buy down. But you don't have to do a 2-1, you can do a 1-0, you can buy down for 1 year, there's other options out there.
so what I.
If you have a concession to use, talk to your lender and say how do I best.
Exactly. Or better yet, what I was gonna say is what I'd like you to do is, as you're crafting your offer, call your lender and say, I'm gonna try and get some concessions. What are some options on how that might be able to be applied? And then your client should be having a conversation with the lender. But you don't want them to have the assumption on, it's gonna pay for my closing costs, it's gonna pay for this, and not have the right information. Or you might have asked for more, or, we gotta set proper expectations.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to see you, call your lender, talk to them about it. What if we were able to get 3%? What could we do with that? What's the best way to apply that?
One comment on that is we had the wording on an addendum come back and the broker wouldn't allow the closing costs. So the way that you have to be specific in your wording of what you put on how you will allow those closing costs to be used. Because if you don't do the correct wording, they can only be used for a buy down. If you don't put in there buy down, closing cost, like there's a whole, I don't know all the words that go.
And we have a supplementary clause for that.
But it's multiple sentences on there. If you do not do that, on the one contract I had, it said, $10,000 to be used towards buy down. Well, we didn't use all 10,000 for the buy down. There was $1,800 that was left on the table. Seller was like, yeah, hard no, I'm not signing an addendum because it's gonna cost me $1,800. Didn't sign an addendum and there was money left on
Well,
the
and
table.
using that right clause should also end with, and any unused portion may be applied towards the purchase price or buyer's discretion.
Right.
So I like to text Corey and say, how do you like this wording?
Yeah.
Is that good word for you?
It was the broker that came back, lender got it through underwriting, said, we're fine, we can go through this. And it came down to the weight of the contract. And they're like, we could have a problem if this kind of came down because it's very specific.
Yep.
So just something to kind of be aware of. We just had that come up. That was the first.
Well, you touched on a good point. I would talk to your lender with respect to when you're writing the offer, when you're crafting it, how should I do this? Make sure you're doing it properly. It's kind of a side note, but I like to plug this anytime I can. Repair addendums, anything like that. You're asking for repairs, please talk to your lender. Because you can cause everybody a bunch of headache and heartache if you show that underwriter a list of everything that happened on your home inspection. The underwriter's gonna say, I need invoices for all these items. I need proof that, that this was repaired by a contractor. So Jeff and I've done that for 10 years. He's like, how do you want this one to read? And I'll say, if you write this, it covers you and it makes it easy in underwriting. So work with your lender, make sure you have a good lender and make sure you work with them and ask those questions as you're crafting any addendum or even your initial offer.
We do not want to cause problems for us. By doing it wrong.
Well, so many people are like, again, you need to protect your clients. As agents, it's very important you protect your clients, but there's a balance there. You can protect them and not subject the seller to things that might cause them to say, no, I was going to do this repair myself, but you're forcing me to have it done by a contractor. And there's ways we can accomplish, we can find something that works for both parties.
Good. Anybody else?
I have a question for you, Andrew. Do you talk on your take on detached garages? And
My take,
evaluation?
I love them. I want a big one next to my pool with an apartment above it.
She asked about detached garages, if you couldn't hear.
Yeah, and just valuation, because I had a recent listing that, to build it would probably cost $550,000. It was like a huge shop with like office spaces, all finished, double insulation. I'd love to hear.
What was the price range of the house?
It was $200,000.
Okay, so this is just very rough rule of thumb. I would say if you have a big outbuilding like that, rough rule of thumb is you're probably 50% of what it costs for value. And then I would also say, if that 50% is like more than 10% of your home's total value, it's probably like an over improvement. So if you're at like a $2 million house and you put in a $500,000 building, I could see you getting 250 out of that. If you're in $1 million house and you put in a $500,000 building, I mean, that building's worth as much, basically as much as your house, assuming your lot's worth, say 3 or 4, your house is worth 6, and then you're putting a building worth 5. Like to have like a detached building worth more than your actual house, like that could be an issue. So I would say rough rule of thumb is like immediate value by half the cost. Very rough. But
I have another question for Andrew too.
Yeah.
When you mentioned well price, right, property. So where's, I mean, so it was, the last home sold 2 months ago for 600,000. So I need to list it for 600,000, it's very similar.
in this market, I would say, I mean, obviously, like every market's different. I mean, for a while, we saw the last home sold for 600, then I better list it 650, and then I'm probably gonna sell for more than that. I mean, we've seen that market. We've also seen markets where if the last home sold for 600 and there's a huge oversupply of houses, and depending on my client's needs, if my client says, hey, I really need to sell this house, then I may want to be like, well, I may want to list it 575 or 550 because I need to sell or it's going to sit for a long time. But my opinion in the current market, it's like I have very similar sales that are at 600, then I would list pretty competitive with that price. And it's interesting is we'll see even like, even like, oh, we list at 650, you think, okay, well, maybe someone will look at it and they'll say, well, we only think it's worth 600 and they'll offer 600. But it's funny how it seems that just even like a 5 to 10% price difference will no one will even look at it.
It'll decrease your views.
Yeah, like the view. So yeah, I would say price is close to what you think it's going to sell for as possible. And it seems like in this market, you're getting activity and typically if you price it low, you're gonna have multiple, I mean, even now, like if it's priced even a little bit low. I mean, say like the house you think is like, okay, last sales are 600, but you think really it is worth 650. If you price it 600, it'll price up. I mean, even in this market, but yeah, I would say, I mean, you guys have all priced more houses.
Yeah, but you want to give the most eyeballs on the property as you can, right?
Yeah.
So if you overshoot it by 10%, you're eliminating some of your buyer pool. And you want competition on the listing. So the conversation with your client on that list price, because it's not an exact science, is it?
No, for sure.
There's a range, there's a low and a high, it's gonna price somewhere in here, right? And so how motivated are they to sell? Can they afford to wait? Can they afford to say, well, this is the price I want? And we don't want to just list what they think it's worth, right? But we can show them the data and say, we should be in this range because a savvy buyer and the real estate agent is gonna look as they're crafting their offer based on what others have sold for, because nobody wants to overpay. We were already talking about that before. So if they're seeing all these 600s and then you're at 650, you might not even get looks. So yeah, I mean, the comps are pretty important.
I think one thing too is if you look at, we see a lot is, sales, like right now, when the MLS reports sales to list price ratios, they report sales to original list price ratios, which are like 95, 96% right now. And if you look at what most homes sell for when they finally sell, most of them are selling for what they're listed at when they sell. Like if you look at final list price ratios, they're almost 100%, or really close. But a lot of stuff's listing 5% high and then has to, you know, and then 30 days later, they drop the price 5% and then it sells. So I mean, like I said, a lot of it's gonna depend on, you know, your client's goals and how fast they want or need to sell. You know, if they said, hey, we're, you know, we don't care that all the comps are 600. We think our house is worth 50 grand more. We wanna see if in 30 days we can sell it for that. And then if we can't, then we'll drop to 600. Then, you know, a lot of people are okay with that if they're not in a hurry, but you know, people are like, no, you know, like, let's list it and get it sold. I need to buy another house. Then, I mean, I would say you need to be as close to the comps as possible.
And I think it kind of also compares on the concessions that you were talking about, like, does it have that detached garage like we was talking about? Does it have something that might be compelling to a buyer that would pay for that? And not all properties need appraisals, right? Or is subject to the appraisal. If they're putting down 30-40% of the purchase price, the appraisal is not as important because it's for the lender to justify the loan amount that they're loaning on the property. So really, when you're talking to your clients, it's like, we're just looking for that one buyer that wants it. And if they have some unique properties, or unique things to the property that Andrew's not gonna really give a full concession for, it's not to say that a buyer might. You know, so it depends on the uniqueness, I think, and the customization of the property. Okay, guys, we're kind of at the
Yeah,
time period where we're gonna end. We're gonna have one more question from Ian, or
A lot of pressure.
This is kind of go back to what Sydney asked about the detached garage, going back to something Corey talked about. With getting into that house, right, making your own concessions, like, doing an ADU. And the question for Andrew, like doing an ADU, like the property with a detached rental property, what kind of value does that kind of going with the detached garage?
So I think it definitely has that. I mean, one interesting thing about appraisals is a lot of times we'll see like on the MLS and like floor number 3 will have a square footage. And then it like it's GLA, like part of the house. And then there'll be like a note that says, you know, floor 3 is actually the ADU that's detached or, you know, or it's another part of the house. So one thing that's not included in the main part of the house, and the Fannie Mae guidelines won't allow it. And most lenders, even if they're not Fannie Mae, won't allow an ADU to be part of the house. So there's also like a very fine line between an ADU and say like a mother-in-law apartment. So if it's truly an ADU, lenders won't allow it to be counted as part of the square footage of the house, which sometimes makes it easier to appraise. So they want it just as like a line item adjustment. So a lot of times if you see on an appraisal, you'll have the normal grid that's all the same on every appraisal. At the bottom, there'll be a few lines that are different every time depending on, and sometimes like we'll just do like an amenities line at the bottom or a features line. And we'll put like it has a 700 square foot ADU that's 2-bedroom and 1 bath. And, you know, and then you're gonna give it a value there. I think definitely it adds value. I was talking to Corey about this the other day. I think early when I started and Corey started, like, used to like have a house and if it had a second kitchen or an apartment, like lenders would throw fits over it. Like,
It was a negative.
yeah, it was a negative. They're like, this house has a second kitchen. Is it a duplex? Like, what's going on? Like, we need to make sure it's up to code and we need to make sure it meets zoning. And they didn't want to lend on it because they would like, it didn't meet their box. But now we've seen a shift where lenders don't, at least as far as I've seen, they don't really have any issues with it. So, you know, a lot of times if it has an ADU, they're going to want us to find other comparables that have ADUs. So, I mean, I would say as far as value goes, like, you know, the best case scenario, we find other comparables that have similar features and add that value. I think I would probably go back to my answer to you that like, if you put an ADU in your backyard and it costs $100,000, like just initially, like I would just tell you the same rule of thumb, it's probably going to be half that if you want to resell that tomorrow. That would be my thought. That being said, I think we're seeing way more demand for supplemental income in properties. People are having to get creative to afford houses. People love the idea of that. You know, you see some people that have an ADU that possibly could be a nightly rental or different things. So there's definitely demand for that type of stuff. So I think we're seeing an increased value in that stuff that we saw traditionally, where traditionally, like we could almost never make an adjustment for something like that because there just was no evidence that showed it added value. Right. But I think we're definitely starting to see a demand for that. Just a real quick example, I just appraised a house in Kearns. like West Kearns, so like upscale Kearns on the. You have like old Kearns that's built in the fifties after the war, that everything is 1,000 square feet, no basement, and then just west of that, you have another neighborhood that's 1,000 square feet and 1,000 square foot basement. Someone had done a great job, remodeled the house and completely separated the upstairs and the downstairs. And is using it, they were actually using both units as Airbnb nightly rentals. And they listed the property at 500 grand, they're under contract at 525. I go out to do the appraisal and I search like everywhere I can find. I'm really generous on where to go for comps, and like I can't find a single house that's ever sold in like the last year that's even remotely close to that for over like 480. And at like 485, and they're under contract at 525 with $20,000 in concessions. So I kind of went back and forth with the, but like I said, the people saw an added value in that. So like now, like looking at that house is going to sell for that, I can look and say, you know, the added value of having that full apartment in the basement, the buyers are looking to live in the main floor and rent the basement to be able to afford their house. I mean, they'll probably, you know, even if they go long-term rental, they're probably going to get, you know, say it was like a 2-bedroom basement apartment, you know, say they get $1,200-$1,300 for their basement on a $500,000 house, you're at $3,000 payment roughly. I mean, you know, so like they're supplementing and you're going to pay $2,000 a month and rent out their basement and have that to supplement. So we're seeing a lot of people want that. So we're seeing, you know, people always ask me, how much do appraisers give for value? And like my comment is like, well, how much do your buyers give for value? You know, like how much is your buyer willing to pay for that? And that's what the appraiser is going to give for value. Ideally, we want support for what buyers will pay for something and how that increases value. So I can look at that property and say, you know, like that property is selling for $25,000 more, roughly 5%, because it has that income potential in the basement. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Roughly. I mean, that's.
Is it harder to get like, what's the loan kind of thing on that?
I mean, what we're looking for is common for the area, right? An ADU, I think you'll see them become more common because a lot of the municipalities used to make it illegal, right? You couldn't build an ADU out on it, but because of the housing shortage, you've seen a lot more flexibility in that. They're allowing more ADUs to be built. So hopefully it becomes more common. But again, we look at it as it's common for the area. So if you're the only ADU and there's no sales, maybe you can find a mother-in-law apartment that you can use as an adjustment.
Yeah,
We'll look at that line item adjustment. But if it's like, hey, you know, the house is selling for 400 and there's $100,000 line item adjustment. And everything else is selling for, or they went to a bigger house to get it. You're not looking at it apples to apples, and you'll probably get some pushback.
I have a quick question. Will they let you include like an ADU income on a purchase to qualify for a house?
If it's, so kind of the guidelines, if it's a legal duplex, so if it's a legal duplex, I actually had this conversation last night with the client. So if it's a legal duplex, the appraiser is going to go out and appraise it and give us a comparative rent analysis.
Yeah, as a duplex.
Right, as a duplex. But if it's a single family and I don't know, I haven't come across that with an ADU.
An ADU, like a legal ADU that they can rent, could you count that income towards?
If it's a legal duplex, even a detached duplex, I would think we'd be able to count that 75% of it.
When you say legal, it just complies with the local.
Correct, because what you can't buy a single family home with a basement apartment, and I plan to rent it out, or we have people all the time, I'm gonna rent out 3 of these bedrooms, or can I count it? You can't.
Yeah.
Because that's border income versus rental income, but if it's a separate unit, a true duplex or a true ADU, I would think we'd be able to count it.
Jeff, we just came across this. It all depends on the city. What is the city codes? Because to Corey's point, it becomes a legal non-conforming property, depending on what the city zoning coding. and ordinance
Allowable
is.
or not allowable.
So is it allowable or not allowable? If it's allowable, yes, you can get a comparable rent schedule. If it's not allowable, we looked at this at a California property. And in one city, it was okay. In another city, less than 5 miles away, it wasn't okay. So it goes to Corey's point, legal non-conforming.
So I encourage people to go.
Yeah, I know, I know guys that build them all the time.
Well, I think his point of the city, like I said, like even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, cities wouldn't allow it.
No.
And now all the city councils, like especially Salt Lake, but even everywhere else are like encouraging it now.
The state legislature.
Yeah, and the state legislature
Yeah.
actually passed a bill basically forcing every city to allow ADUs because they know the housing shortage. So,
I'll just add in, I think the hardest thing with ADUs is getting comps. So Because a mother-in-law apartment, you're never gonna be able to use income. So even if it's just like an ADU, if it's not zoned perfectly as an ADU, there's no chance, like you said, like Porter. But then also having the comps to be able to get a rental analysis for an ADU is gonna be a little bit of a struggle too. So technically it's possible, but it's one that you probably wanna have your lender do a little bit of background before on what is in the area, so that you know you're not counting on something that's gonna become a problem when you get the rental analysis. That really is super easy for a duplex. Or just normal investment property. ADU is one where it gets a little bigger.
I just one other thing, and I don't want to promote builders that aren't Edge Homes, because Edge Homes is amazing. But there are a few, and maybe Edge has this product too, I don't know. But there are a few, and if they do, that's awesome, then you should talk to Edge. But there are a few builders that are actually building specific brand new construction with ADU apartments to supplement income as a brand new home. Does Edge have that product?
You can do that. Yep.
Yeah, so
Great.
yeah, so there you go. But that even as a brand new house, and so like obviously cities are promoting that and approving it. And if you do that in a brand new neighborhood that's building that, that's it.
Okay, this is really the last question, and I'm only doing it because we got a question from Zoom. And we're gonna be saying goodbye to them while we have lunch, and you guys are gonna stick around and you guys can mingle and ask more questions and visit, there's just more networking after. But the question is, you wanted me to ask what the adjustment you would give for a house. All the questions are for appraisers.
That's what I said. That's off limits, but.
Well, I think we
want
covered the
like,
other stuff.
property guy,
Yeah,
you know, they're
I
gonna
just did a
talk to
bad
him.
job that up
you guys are
front.
just a mystery.
Yeah.
So.
People don't get to talk to her.
That's what I'm saying, they're all.
Exactly. So, what adjustment you would give for a house with 1,800 square feet all above grade versus half up, half down? Same square footage.
Those two houses aren't comparable.
Yeah, man.
They're not the same.
They're not even.
So it wouldn't be an adjustment.
It's funny, yeah, was it, you guys talked about earlier today that we just don't do price per square foot?
Yeah.
Like especially you get people from other states.
Just so you guys know, as agents, if you want to get traction with your lender and your appraiser, don't come to them with, but everything's selling for X dollars per square
Yeah.
foot, because that's not how our side of the business really.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely, I mean, just to try and get like basement square footage is gonna be worth less than above grade square footage, but typically if I'm appraising a house that's say in Sugar House and this just the first thing I thought of where you see 900 square feet on the main floor and 900 square feet in the basement all day long. Like, I'm not even gonna use a house that's 1,800 square feet all on one floor to compare to that, because I don't think those houses are comparable. I'm gonna try and find, and obviously, in a perfect world, we have perfect comparables, and I get we don't live. in
Okay,
a
so
perfect
to
world,
restate the question then, is the one with 1,800 square foot above grade more valuable than the one that has 900 above grade and 900?
There's just way too many variables to say. I mean, like if like quality wise they were the same and functionality wise they were the same, I would say yes.
The above ground square footage. should count.
Yeah, but I mean, but if you think like say I am in Sugar House and like every house is like a 900 square foot bungalow, and then I have this one random house that's 1,800 square feet with no basement, like that's unique. And so like that, you know, I mean, if it's done really, really well and at the same, then I would say yes, the above grade would be worth more, but I would try to find comparables to support that.
Yeah. Well, because the ceiling height, then the other one's only 6 feet.
Yeah. It's possible for sure, and it's nice. Typically, like it's what most appraisers adjust, like main floor square footage versus basement square footage. I mean, you're probably what, 75-80%. I mean, about just based on what most appraisers adjust. Like I said, every market's different, everything's different. Park City forever, like they don't claim basements, they just say this is the square footage. And they don't separate basements, which was always a pain for appraisers. We're like, we can't, you know, all the comps are listed, but they've actually changed and actually Fannie Mae's gotten very specific with, I don't know if you remember last year, they came out with new measuring guidelines through like ANSI like standards, and basement has to be basement. So that only happened a year ago. So like it's market specific for sure.
Yeah.
And anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm sure everyone has their card.
That's
in the
good
back.
commentary,
Call
though,
me.
because a lot of times the answer is it depends.
Yeah, it
It
is.
depends.
With
Like,
appraisers,
it's
it's all, the very first, I took my training appraiser classes and we'd always ask like, well, how much do we adjust for a 2-car garage versus a 3-car garage? And like our teachers would not give us an answer. And it's like, so I'm like, well, I'm trying to learn and you won't tell me. So then and so
You
like,
gotta figure it out.
so
on
now
your
I've learned as an appraiser that just never give a specific answer.
own. Yeah.
Always a range.
All right, Corey, Andrew, Stephanie, thank you very much. Thank you guys for sticking with us to the end. I wish you were here in person to have some lunch with us, but we're gonna cut you loose. Unless you want me to just turn the camera and tease you.
So I just have one thing, if you guys have like comparables, something unique you want me, I'll sit down on a computer and I'll walk you through what I would do to pull comparables. And I will do that with you one time totally for free, I won't charge you, I don't mind it, and I think it's good for agents to understand how an appraiser pulls comparables, so. I went to an agent's office and they said, this is really unique, I don't know what to do. And I like said, hey, pull up your MLS, I'll pull up my MLS, let's have a call. And I walked through how I would pull comparables. So if you have that and want, I'm more than happy to do it with you. So, and if you ever want me back to your office, I've been to their office and done a class before.
Yeah, let's do it again.
That's a great answer.
Cool. Okay, thanks, guys. That's a wrap.
Okay. Hey guys, you got salads back here, so have fun.
Thank you, I learned some good information.
Oh, you bet.
It's great, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah,
You're the unicorn. Yeah.
I don't know if this is like
When it goes well, then love it.
Yeah. You want them all to say it? Black on white. Black out on
I'll get the white on white. He's got the same the whole white.
Is yours the black on black out there? I'm the white on white.
Yeah,
White, right?
I'm, yeah.
I like it.
I know. Now I know something. Well, I want to go because the warm stuff, it almost says.
We were like,
Cause I.
market, I mean, people are serious, I'm not even, I think there were 5-10 grants. And it was like, we had 3 agents, pull confident, agents consider it, and we
Yeah,
was
for
like,
sure. Yeah.
accent. It was expensive. You're like, settle down. We would have. We didn't need to.
Do I need to keep this?
No.
Okay.
We just, I can tell. Okay.
Oh, baby.
Yeah.
So she was pregnant when we were having lunch.
Yeah.
Did you know? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Congratulations, CJ.
Okay. No, yeah, you should be able to.
I'll feed it into it and see what it kicks out, and then whatever it kicks out, I'll feed the both, I'll feed you guys.
Or, so there's different levels of liability. For me, it's
Everybody's trying to come up with their exact Google type names. And
So like,
we'll see how
my
it is.
husband and I were actually setting our
Right.
stuff committee with our
So do you
attorney
give
today to get everything
or
set
anything
up.
to find anything on this? How does it know what's the pertinent
You
content?
either should be, is like.
Let it go through. So you tell them, click.
If you're single, let's say that it was just me and
And we'll go through, and it'll go through and pull out those 60-second,
If I
20-second clips.
My husband has.
And then we'll let that run through, and then
Then
it's
it's
about 45 minutes,
You're
and
sure
then
to
it's
get
a
lighting it, but
30,
if
60
he
second
thought
clips.
or he
And then we'll send it in
that,
again,
just
and then
takes time.
so
And it's in the trust.
and then then we let it flash. Then it also puts out. It also- So it edits the video, flips it, and puts the words on it. And then it also gives you the recommendations on these recommendations.
If we both die, then we get a successor.
Something, oh, I wish we did that, she'll go in and be like, okay, go to this one, add 5 seconds ahead and cut it.
That would be really good for like, say we were doing this again, or I'm redoing a training, to
They can't break that middle
like this highlight. Yeah.
And then now. So when you have somebody short, wait a second.
It's like, we want to get away from it, right? Where,
Oh, the band?
like, luckily, and pretty.
Yeah, Dom's way better if they want you. Well, you guys do yours first.
Okay, can I give you the step?
One, two.
Oh, good to see you.
So-
Three.
She doesn't like one in there. Marchant.
Hold on. Right. I just hung up on the phone. I'm putting it up here because I'm trying to avoid the TV in the background. There you go.
He's trying to make it.
Yeah.
We all love that.
Good to see you. I came down.
And what we said was, well, we got more like real light on the. We were not gonna just say. There was like. And it was very much. Legit offer. We would not deny it. And then what they ended up happening was going to and getting out of the property. Like, no, like they got that property. Like, so we don't have to. So that was, there was a big court action. Hey, we are selling. And I was just like,